I think it's fair to say that pretty much every business that exists today relies on computers to function. And when your business grows to more than like 1 or 2 employees and like 1 or 2 computers in the whole business, you start asking questions like who should have access to what computer systems, what passwords should they use, etc. And I'm sure some of you have worked for a small business that just sort of writes the password for each laptop on a sticky note like this. I've definitely seen this happen. Once you get more than a couple employees and a couple laptops though, you really need some sort of solution for identity management. What is everyone's account name? They have their own password, they can log into each system, some sort of cohesive management of user accounts in your company. And for the last 20 years or so, like the standard that every business runs is Microsoft Active Directory. Now they have a cloud offering, Entra, Azure Active Directory, that kind of stuff. But essentially Microsoft held this monopoly for a very long time. And I would be very surprised if you go out to a business today that's not relying on Active Directory or the cloud versions of it still today. But of course, this comes at a bit of a cost. I mean, there's obviously the licensing costs of Active Directory and Windows itself, which are extremely reasonable for most businesses. But the real cost is who you're going to get from support. So imagine you've migrated your entire business to Microsoft Entra. You have hundreds of users in the system, in the cloud, and then one day your tenant gets deleted. Now your whole business has ground to a halt. Microsoft's AI flagged you as who knows what based on who knows what they won't tell you. So you try to ring them up on the phone. I mean, support moved to India, right? But they don't even have phone support in India anymore. You can't even get a hold of the Indians. Now you got to talk to Microsoft AI, who tells you that, I don't know, they don't know what's wrong and they're not going to call you back. So maybe if you're a business, your solution is to hire an even bigger business to go yell at Microsoft for you. And that just sounds like, to me, a terrible way to build something that's reliable for your infrastructure. So I mean, Microsoft made Active Directory and it was very good at the time. But now you just can't rely on anything they make to be useful for you long term, because who knows what they're going to cancel and who knows if they're ever going to support it with real people again. So today, I'm taking a look at FreeIPA. FreeIPA is an identity and policy management solution that manages things like account credentials, that kind of stuff, authentication in different methods around your network, and it's extremely powerful, similar to Active Directory. But it's not just an Active Directory clone, it's its own independent project. So it's been developed by Red Hat over the course of a really long time. You can get paid enterprise support for Red Hat and for FreeIPA, Red Hat Identity Manager if you'd like. But it's also open source, so you're welcome to run it on your own for free, which is what I'm doing today. And so if you need a very thorough organizational identity, policy, and audit management solution, FreeIPA might be what you need. But before you jump right to dumping Google and Microsoft, take a little bit of time to think about how you're going to handle email in this new setup. Maybe with this video's sponsor, Proton Unlimited. So way back when I started Applar's Adventures, originally I was just a blog. I still have a blog. But before that even, I had a domain name, and I needed an email for that domain so I could do businessy things. And way back then, I chose Proton to host my email for my small business. While the actual mechanics of hosting your own email aren't that hard, I found that dealing with things like IP reputation and getting yourself off of spam lists was just too much of a hassle for me, and I was willing to pay a privacy-focused company to handle that part of my infrastructure instead of self-hosting it. So this whole time my mailbox has been end-to-end encrypted with Proton. I can access it using the Proton app or the web UI. But if I want to use an existing mail client over like IMAP or POP3, or send email from my infrastructure over SMTP, they have a bridge for that as well, so I can run that locally on my infrastructure. That'll handle all the encryption and decryption, and that way their servers are only seeing my encrypted messages. Now, since I signed up for them many years ago, they've expanded their service offerings as well. They now have things like a Google Drive equivalent, where you can do docs, spreadsheets, file storage, that kind of stuff. They have password manager, VPN, AI chat, a couple other features that they've added recently. And so all of those are included in the Proton Unlimited bundle that includes all of their different features. So sign up today at protonvpn/applard to get 30% off Proton Unlimited. Now back to the video. So to show you how powerful having this centralized identity management can be, let's imagine that my small business here just hired a new employee. This is actually one of my moderators for my Discord. You should totally check out my Discord, by the way, but his name is Flax. Let's get him set up in the computer system so he can do his work. So I'm here in FreeIPA. I got some accounts here. Let's go ahead and add a new user for him. His name is Flax. His name is Flax. I don't know what his last name is. We'll call him intern. He's going to have to change his password, but I guess for now we can call his password testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we could look at all the different information we have about him, his identity, his account settings, etc. We don't actually have to look at most of this, but I do want to change and add him to a member of a group. So let's go ahead and add him to the, let's see, is he engineering or finance? I don't remember. Let's add him to, I don't know, sales. He's probably sales. Let's add him to sales. So now he exists in the system, but he also needs a computer. So here we go, I got him a computer. Couldn't afford to buy him a new computer, so this is one we repurposed from an employee that left. So it might have their stuff on it, but that's fine. The system should be able to work that out. Also, since it's just a demo, I'm using this Jet KVM to log into it remotely, but in reality, he would get like a keyboard and a mouse and a whole workstation and all the good stuff. Maybe I'd give him a laptop too, that'd be cool. So over here in his brand new Fedora machine, we can see that this must have been Alice's computer before, but Alice is now gone. So let's go ahead and log in as Flax. And I need a password, which we remember was testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's going to tell us we got to change our password. He's not very good with passwords, so maybe he just keeps it testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know. And now it should go ahead and log him into Fedora. Yeah, okay, well he hasn't done the tour yet, but we can just skip the tour. We don't really need that. So remember, I did not create an account for him on this particular workstation. It's just that all of my workstations in this example are set up as part of this domain in FreeIPA. So they can all authenticate to the FreeIPA server, they can share user and group information. All of the normal Linux utilities that look at UID and GID, user and groups, will all work perfectly fine. I added him to the sales group, so he should be able to look at sales files. Let's see how that works. So we'll go here and we'll look at some files. Let's see, where do we have some files? Maybe we need to go to maybe /corp. That's where our corporation keeps stuff. So I try to go to engineering here. It might give me an error, but let's see. Yeah, this looks like I don't have permission to access engineering. But remember, he is a member of sales, so he can probably get into the sales folder. And there we go. Yeah, he's got some sales file. Maybe I should make a text document here for him. Enter. So I can go ahead and save that in corp. My name is flax.txt. There we go. So he accessed the file in his sales that he has access to. Also like to point out, I didn't have to configure that mount on this host at all, because again, FreeIPA manages that. So I told FreeIPA, I have these NFS shares that I'd like to share with everyone in the company. It adds them here. They auto-mount over NFS. NFS uses Kerberos credentials, which he got from logging in. He's a member of the sales group, so he has access to that folder by GID permissions, and it all just worked. So just to be clear, that access came here from groups. So in FreeIPA, groups, user groups. So he's a member of sales. So sales has a group ID in Linux, and if I create files and folders that group ID can access, that just propagates correctly. So this may seem like magic, but this is really like 3 or 4 or 5 different protocols all wrapped up in a trench coat with a nice web UI on top, which is actually what Microsoft Active Directory is also, and this uses a lot of the same underlying protocols, even though it's not wire compatible with Microsoft. So we've integrated a couple things here. We have the directory. That's where we store all of the user information, group membership, stuff like that. In this case, that's LDAP, or Directory Server 389 is the open source implementation here. The next thing is our real-time authentication, and that's done with Kerberos. So Kerberos was developed by MIT in the 80s, and it's a crypto system completely separate from modern TLS certificates. So everything in Kerberos runs through an authentication server, the ticket granting server, and the ticket granting server has the option to apply policy to every single authentication request. But you might think, wow, that's a lot of requests to the ticket granting server. In Kerberos, these requests last quite a long time. So when you access a web page, you end up with a ticket valid for that web server that might last you for a couple of hours or a couple of days even. So you're not doing every single web request is not hitting the ticket granting server, but every time you visit a new resource, you have to get a ticket for that resource from the ticket granting server, which can look up what your access is in the LDAP database, grant you the ticket, and this whole thing works entirely through AES security. So there's no public key cryptography, and that makes it actually rather quantum safe. So Kerberos is kind of a magical mechanism there. When I logged into this computer, it generated me a Kerberos ticket granting ticket for my user. So I now have a ticket granting ticket that shows that I have authenticated myself to the Kerberos server. From there, when I access NFS, the NFS server also speaks Kerberos. So I have to get a ticket for NFS for that server, but that all happens in the background automatically. And when I run FreeIPA domain join on this host, all of that is set up and all of that just sort of works out of the box. But of course, it's not just for NFS. So if I go here to Firefox, maybe I have some internal business website I need to use. And so maybe it's at like https://web03. So my business is applr.test here. So I go to web03. And so this website now, which is part of my domain, so the web server is joined to my domain, it sees that I am Flax, I am not a member of the sysadmin group, and it verified me. So one of the hassles of single sign-on is that in a lot of single sign-on systems, what they mean is we have a password database that's shared across the whole company. So every time you go to a new website or something, you can log in with the same password. But Kerberos does not work that way. It's not that you have a single password, it's that you truly have a single credential at a given time, and that is universal. So when I went to this software website, which could have been some sort of project manager, etc., that I'm self-hosting, I don't have to visit the login screen at all. It can ask my laptop or workstation here, what is your Kerberos ticket? The Kerberos backend will get a ticket for that website for my user, present it to the website, all transparently to me, and the website now gets that I've been verified by the Kerberos server for the domain for a certain amount of time, and here's my user information. If it needs more information, it can go to the database and get that information as well. And in this case, I asked that is it a member of a certain group, the sysadmin group, and it's not. And so that information is all possible to access on the web server end without any sort of login page. It's all just truly single sign-in. You sign into the computer and you have access to everything your user has access to. And of course, there's more to life than just websites. What about SSH? So what if I want to SSH into, I don't know, nas02.bar.test? So in this case, it kicked me out, presumably because I'm not authorized. But let's see what that looks like for an admin. So let's go ahead and we'll log out of Flax. So I'm going to log in as my domain administrator. So I'm back in the same place I was, but now I'm logged in as the administrator. So I can now SSH into nas02.applr.test, and here I am. So I got an error that I don't have a home directory, which makes sense because it's a server. But if I print working directory, I'm at /. But what if I want a sudo then too? So now I've just done a couple magical things. So I accessed the website as Flax. He didn't have access to SSH, so I logged in as a different user who can. Now I SSH my way to the server, but now can I sudo on the server as well? So maybe sudo DNF update. Okay, enter my password again, makes sense. There we go. I mean, it's not happy, but yeah, it's working. It's not happy because I told it can't update because then ZFS would be broken, but that's unrelated to this video. So in this system now, I can manage who my users are, who their groups are, which machines they can log into, if they can log in locally, over SSH, and via sudo, and those are all separate permissions I can edit. So coming back to IPA here, that is under policy, host base access control, and under sudo. So for example, I have some rules here. So by default, it allows anyone to access anyone, which is probably not what you want. So I have a group that says sysadmins are allowed to SSH, and real humans are allowed to log into workstations. So let's look at how this works. So this is pretty simple. So this rule applies to people. It gives access to workstations. And yeah, so people is a group. This is essentially any user account that's not a service account, so it's a real person. And this just inherits up from different user groups. So it inherits from the engineering, finance, sales, sysadmin. So because Flax was a member of sales, he was therefore a member of people, and people can log into workstations. But how do we figure out the workstations? I did that one manually too. So under host groups, I have just servers and workstations. And under workstations, I've just added all of my workstations here. In this case, this is WS202. So at this point, you probably want to know how to set up FreeIPA. And unfortunately, it's a little bit complicated. So I'm going to point you to the official quick start guide, and then I'm going to give you some tips and tricks that I learned while testing it out that hopefully make your deployment go a little bit smoother. So first, operating system. So the only two operating systems that are officially supported by FreeIPA are Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Fedora. I have used Fedora in every system in this video to simplify deployment. The client works on a wide variety of operating systems, including Debian and Ubuntu families. The server only supports Red Hat and Fedora. Presumably it would also support Rocky as well, if you want to go down that path. So next slight tip I'll give involves time. Time is absolutely critical to Kerberos. So when Kerberos does a lot of different handshakes, remember it doesn't have public key cryptography, so it often will encrypt the time using AES and send that as a sort of proof. And so the time on the two ends of the system has to be within just a couple of minutes. This is different from like TLS, where it just has to be within the same validity window, which could be 30 days or 90 days or whatever. So all of the IPA server and client install scripts are going to try to install and configure Crony to manage the system time. And if you're on a virtual machine or a physical system, absolutely do that. If you're running in an LXC container on Proxmox like I am, you have to disable this because LXC containers can't modify the system clock. But probably the most important tip I can give to anyone is absolutely work out your DNS and your naming conventions before you get started with this, because it can be really hard to change the name of your domain in your realm later. In fact, I'd recommend starting from a test domain just to get a couple of systems up and running and make sure you're happy with it, and then wipe them out and redo them again with the real domain. So I used applr.test here. I've recreated applr.test about 3 times in the last week. When I'm done with this video, I'm going to delete applr.test and recreate my new ipa.applr.net, a subdomain of my real domain that I own, or a similar domain like applr.fi maybe. So the most important thing about DNS that I can stress is that before you even start installing IPA anywhere, you must have your DNS sorted or have a plan to sort it with IPA. So I made a video, maybe somewhere up here, about how DHCP is not your inventory, and you should not be relying on DHCP to push host names into DNS. And I still absolutely support that. That's definitely true. But this is something that IPA can really, really help you with if you use all the DNS update features and the domain correctly. So one of the sort of baseline requirements for IPA to work and Kerberos in general is that forward and reverse domains must work entirely correctly. And for domain join systems, the host name must be fully qualified. So that's a lot of words to say. Normally your host name is something like Applard's laptop, but now it has to be a full domain name so that it can resolve what domain it's in. So in this case, it'd be applardslaptop.applard.test. And so all of your host names that are involved in IPA have to have that fully qualified name with the domain on the end, not just the host name by itself. And then DNS must properly point to all of these hosts by name. Now FreeIPA actually can do this DNS updating for you. So if you run an IPA domain that's like ipa.applard.net, the domain controller actually runs DNS server for that zone, and it can update all of its own records for discovery, but also all of the client records for you. So you really should use that, which means that whatever domain your domain controller is what domain your host should be part of if you're relying on that automatic update. You could also use automatic update with like NS update over DNS or something like that, but this is really easy. The other thing that I'm sure is going to trip every single one of you up is reverse DNS. So in DNS, you can take an IP address and ask for a pointer record to get the host name of that IP address. So the way you do that is you take the IP address and you write it in reverse. So an IP address that's like 10.10.20.30 would become 30.20.10.10.inazure.arpa. And then we ask for pointer record. And then each time we have a dot, we can delegate. For IPv6, it's every single hex digit. So we have this address would turn into this IP6.arpa. And we query that, get back a pointer record that tells us what the name of that server is. That all must work correctly for every single system in your domain. Let me emphasize that again. Your reverse DNS must be correct for Kerberos to work. So if you're on like a cloud environment or something like that, it's usually really easy to add reverse DNS. The cloud provider will just make it drop down in their system. On your own network, I had to override the reverse DNS zones on my local DNS resolver, Technidium. So my ISP delegates to me a v6/56. They don't give me the ability to update reverse DNS there, so all of my reverse DNSs would be wrong. So I have my local DNS resolver in the closet over there, Technidium. It is running the /56 zone. It's then redirecting that to my IPA server, which manages reverse DNS for me. If you don't have a static IPv6 prefix, this will probably be kind of hell. If you do NAT IPv4, every single system that accesses Kerberos must have access to the reverse DNS. That means if your IPv4 is a mess and you have overlapping subnets, this is probably not going to work for you. But what I have now, Technidium, that is my DNS resolver. Every client goes to that resolver to get DNS. Technidium is forwarding two domains, applr.test and the reverse DNS zone for IPv6 to my IPA server. None of my clients are on IPv4, so IPv4 is never a problem. But if you're on IPv4, you have to delegate that one also. Now, every time a client joins the domain, it's enrolled in dynamic DNS automatically. So now every time the client's IP address changes, it'll update that on the IPA server. The IPA server will also update itself. If you have more than one IPA server, they'll synchronize to each other. All of that works beautifully. So since I'm doing this delegation as well, it's recommended to use a subdomain or a different domain than your production domain. So in this case, my production domain is applr.net. So you guys know I host things at applr.net. If I were to use applr.net as my domain, then that whole domain gets hosted by FreeIPA, and I have to mix all of my internal systems and all of my external sites on that zone for Kerberos to work correctly, especially if I have cloud services that are logging into Kerberos. What I could do instead is buy a second domain, applr.de, applr.fi, something like that, host my Kerberos over there. If you're a company, you could have like a -internal or -int or something, or you could make a subdomain like ipa.company.com. So one thing I will demonstrate though is how easy it is to enroll new clients into the domain. So I'm going to do this in a virtual machine on Proxmox. Setup is similar, but there are some quirks if you're running in an LXC container. Link down below for those. So I'm starting this time with a template from Fedora. So I made a video before about how a lot of distributions produce cloud templates you can import directly into Proxmox with our CloudNet. And so I'm using one of those. If you follow my script from that video, maybe I'll have a link down below for the script as well. You can install these Fedora templates, Debian templates, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to clone the template. We're going to call it serve07, and we're going to make it a full clone. Let's go ahead. Sometimes you have to make sure the name in Proxmox is fully qualified. In this case, though, the VM seems smart enough to add the search domain on the end, so we're just going to leave it as is. So now in the VM setup, I need a user to log in initially to do the provisioning. So I could use applr for that. We'll just set the password to testing123. We need to set the DNS domain and DNS servers properly. So in this case, my DNS domain is applr.test, and my DNS server is 53. We don't actually need IPv4 in this case, so I'm just going to use IPv6 only. Of course, this is up to you, whatever your network does. And so it'll update packages. That'll take a little while, so we'll regenerate our CloudInit image and go ahead and get started. So with CloudInit, the first time the VM starts up, it's going to read like a virtual CD-ROM drive that has all this config in it. And so it'll know my user account that I'm created for provisioning. It'll know its search domain, its host name, DNS servers, IP address, all that kind of stuff. So it's also going to update packages, and that's going to take a little while. So let's let it go ahead and do some updates, and then we'll come back. And it finally looks like it's done, so I'll go ahead and log in as my provisioning user. And the only package I have to install is FreeIPA client. And once that's done, there's just a command to enroll. So sudo IPA client install. Now you can add some options here. If we look at the help, you can see there's a lot of different options for how we want to configure this. So we could say if we want to hard-code a password into a script or credential, something like that. If you want to use no NTP, so I usually use no NTP on LXC containers because they have permissions, etc. If you want to automatically create home directories on login or not, so usually I don't do that for servers and I do that for clients, etc. But if we run it just with the default options, that's basically the best for servers, so we'll go ahead and do that. It automatically discovered my domain controller. We'll say yes. And so now I just have to give it the credentials of a user in IPA who's allowed to enroll clients. I'm using my admin here, but you can use other people you've delegated this role to. So I'll get a machine certificate, a Kerberos principal for the machine, It'll enroll in DNS. It'll set up automatic DNS, SSH. All of that will automatically get provisioned now. So now I should be able to log out as my local user and log back in as a domain user. And there we go. Now that I'm logged in as a domain user, I can SSH into other systems as well. That was pretty easy. Also, don't forget to come back and add your new server to the servers group. So I guess we'll add, which one are we? Servo 7, Servo 8. So now I guess the thought is, where am I going to go with FreeIPA in the future? Am I going to keep running this domain, spread it across my whole home lab, etc.? And the answer is, I'm not going to keep this domain, but I'm going to keep FreeIPA. So this domain is appler.test. Obviously, I never intended on keeping it because .test isn't a real TLD. It's reserved for testing. So I need to stand up a new FreeIPA domain with all of the lessons I've learned from running this test network. And I've decided I'm going to do that on appler.fi. So appler.net is my primary domain. If I was a company, the general advice would be to make a subdomain for FreeIPA. So ipa.appler.net, something like that. However, I own appler.fi also. And I already use appler.free for all of my infrastructure. So all of my server host names, stuff like that, those go in .fi, and then the websites, the stuff publicly visible, that goes in .net. So FreeIPA owning .fi entirely would make a lot of sense there. So that essentially means my domain controller is going to own the entire zone, appler.fi. My domain controllers will be directly off of that domain. I'm still going to use a subdomain for each location. So this location has a code name. You might have seen in some videos. So I have like host.location.appler.fi, and FreeIPA is perfectly fine with that domain hierarchy as long as all the domain controllers know the domain is not the 3-level domain, it's the 2-level domain. So that's something FreeIPA can do just fine. So from there, I'm going to start moving over my CDN infrastructure. So this is my ASN stuff, my public routers. They need some TLC a little bit, but I've been really busy because my wedding's coming up. So they're going to get migrated over to be FreeIPA joined as well. I'm going to migrate some of the tunnels between them. I might move them to IPsec. I might keep them IPIP, I'm not entirely sure. But in any case, all of the certificate management for all of this stuff within the CDN is going to come out of FreeIPA. So FreeIPA has a certificate authority. It automatically installs its root in every computer. So I can sign certificates for my domain really easily through FreeIPA. So I do a lot of mutual TLS across the CDN, and I can do that now with the FreeIPA signed certs, all managed and automated there. Now, like I said, I have my wedding coming up. It's in like 2 or 3 weeks whenever this video publishes. After that, I also have a cutover of my ISP. So the internet connection is currently in her name. The housing association is going to start paying for basic 100 meg internet service. So we have to move the contract over to that instead of just paying it ourselves. I'm going to take over that account because at the time I didn't have a Finnish ID. Now I do. So then I'm going to move the routing and everything when we cut over to the new service. It's still with the same company, but it's still going to be a bit of a change. So when that happens, I'm probably going to put in the Protectly router initially until the hardware offload gets a bit more stable on mono, and then the mono gateway. But either way, it's going to be running the systemd network deconfig I showed in the last video up here. So that's going to be my routing. I'm going to have DNS and reverse DNS will be settled properly. And then FreeIPA will run the DNS authoritative infrastructure now. So I don't need Technidium anymore to edit all of my DNS manually. I can have FreeIPA manage that with DNS updates, and it'll be much nicer. So that's where I'm going for here. I have links down below to the quick start guide from FreeIPA, and I suggest you read that to get started. I found that setting up a test domain a couple of times helped me figure out what I really needed to do. So you might want to spend a little bit of time looking at this and trying it. Getting your DNS, and especially your reverse DNS sorted, is very critically important. I also sell t-shirts if you want to support me. So Home Lab, your own personal data center. Also thanks to Proton for sponsoring this video. And I have a Discord server, link down below for that as well. So I guess I'll see you guys on the next adventure.